The cold rain hammered against the windows of the Admiralty building in London. Inside the oak-paneled war room, a group of tired men sat around a massive table covered with maps and charts. The year was 1941, and Britain was fighting for its survival. Every day brought worse news from the Atlantic Ocean. Admiral Sir Percy Noble stood at the head of the table. His face looked older than his 50 years. Dark circles hung beneath his eyes. He had not slept properly in weeks. How could he? Every night, German submarines called U-boats were sinking British ships. Merchant vessels carrying food, fuel, and weapons from America were being destroyed before they could reach Britain. "Gentlemen, we lost 12 ships last week," the admiral said quietly. His voice was heavy with exhaustion. 12 ships. That's over 60,000 tons of supplies at the bottom of the ocean, and more than 800 men dead. The officers around the table shifted uncomfortably in their chairs. They all knew the numbers. The numbers were terrifying. Since the war began in 1939, German U-boats had sent over 4 million tons of Allied shipping to the ocean floor. The Germans called it the happy time because their submarines were winning so easily. Commander James Blackwell, a veteran destroyer captain, spoke up. "We're doing everything we can, sir. Our escort ships use depth charges. We've improved our sonar systems, but these U-boats are like ghosts. They strike without warning and disappear." Another officer nodded. "The wolf pack tactics are devastating. One U-boat spots a convoy, calls in others, and they attack from all directions at night. Our escorts can't protect every ship." Admiral Noble rubbed his temples. The Battle of the Atlantic, as Prime Minister Churchill called it, was the most important battle of the entire war. If Britain could not receive supplies from across the ocean, the island nation would starve. The Germans knew this. Their U-boat commander, Admiral Karl Dönitz, had promised Hitler he would strangle Britain into surrender. In the corner of the room sat a man who looked different from the naval officers. Dr. Charles. Goodeve wore a civilian suit that seemed too big for his thin frame. His gray hair stuck up in odd directions and his thick glasses kept sliding down his nose. He was a scientist from the Royal Naval Scientific Service. While the military men discussed tactics and weapons, Goodeve stared at a notebook filled with equations and sketches. "Dr. Goodeve," the admiral said, noticing the scientist for the first time. "You've been very quiet. Do you have any suggestions? We need new ideas. Unconventional ideas. Anything that might help." Goodeve looked up from his notebook. His eyes blinked rapidly behind his glasses. For a moment he seemed unsure whether to speak. The naval officers all turned to look at him. Some of them thought scientists had no place in military planning. What could this bookish man possibly know about fighting submarines? "Well," Goodeve began slowly, pushing his glasses up his nose, "I've been studying the reports of U-boat attacks. There's something interesting in the patterns." "Patterns?" Commander Blackwell sounded skeptical. "The only pattern is that they sink our ships." Goodeve stood up, his notebook clutched in his hands. He walked to the large map of the Atlantic Ocean that covered one wall. U-boats attack primarily at night when visibility is poor. They use periscopes during the day, but at night they surface and use lookouts. That's the accepted understanding, correct? The officers nodded. Everyone knew this, but how do they find targets in the first place? Goodeve asked. The Atlantic is enormous. A convoy of ships is tiny compared to the vast ocean. Yet U-boats seem to find our convoys with remarkable accuracy, even in bad weather or darkness. Admiral Noble leaned forward. They have good intelligence. They intercept our radio messages. They position themselves along known shipping routes. Yes, that's part of it, Goodeve agreed. But there's something else. Something we've been missing. He paused dramatically. What if the U-boats can sense our ships even when they can't see them? The room fell silent. Several officers exchanged confused glances. "Sense them how?" the admiral asked. Goodeve's hands trembled slightly with excitement. "Magnetic detection, sir. Every steel ship creates a massive magnetic field simply by existing. The metal hull becomes magnetized as the ship is built, and as it travels through the Earth's magnetic field. A U-boat doesn't need to see a ship. It can detect the magnetic signature from underwater." Commander Blackwell laughed. "That's ridiculous. Ships aren't magnets." "Actually, they are," Goodeve said firmly. His quiet voice suddenly carried authority. "I've tested this. A large steel vessel creates a magnetic disturbance that can be detected from hundreds of meters away with the right equipment. The Germans are clever. I believe their U-boats carry magnetic detection devices. Even if that's true, another officer said, what can we do about it? We can't build ships out of wood. We need steel. Goodave turned to face the room. His eyes gleamed behind his glasses. What if we could cancel out a ship's magnetic signature? What if we could make our ships magnetically invisible? The room erupted in conversation. Some officers shook their heads. Others whispered to each other. The idea sounded like science fiction. Admiral Noble raised his hand for silence. Dr. Goodeve, are you suggesting this is actually possible? I believe so, sir. We would wrap copper cables around the ship's hull in a specific pattern. When we pass electrical current through these cables, they create a magnetic field that opposes the ship's natural magnetism. The two fields cancel each other out. The ship becomes magnetically neutral, invisible to magnetic detectors. That's insane, Commander Blackwell muttered. It's called degaussing, Goodeve continued, and if I'm right, it could save hundreds of ships and thousands of lives. Admiral Noble studied the scientist carefully. Britain was desperate. Conventional tactics were not working. Perhaps a crazy idea was exactly what they needed. How long would you need to test this theory? The Admiral asked. 2 weeks, sir. Give me one ship in 2 weeks, the Admiral made his decision. You have your 2 weeks, Dr. Goodeve. God help us all if you're wrong. The morning after the meeting, Dr. Charles Goodeve arrived at the Royal Naval Laboratory in Portsmouth carrying a heavy leather bag. His assistant, a young engineer named Thomas Wright, was already waiting outside the building. Thomas was fresh from university, eager but nervous. The war had interrupted his studies, and now he found himself working on secret projects he barely understood. Good morning, Dr. Goodeve, Thomas said. The Admiral's office called. They want a full demonstration of your magnetic theory by this afternoon. Several senior officers are coming to observe. Goodeve nodded calmly, though his stomach churned with anxiety. He had only 12 hours to prove that his idea was not the rambling of a mad scientist. If he failed, the Admiralty would dismiss him. Meanwhile, more ships would sink and more sailors would die. Inside the laboratory, Goodeve cleared a large wooden table. He placed a standard maritime compass in the center. The needle pointed steadily north as it should. Then he pulled a thick steel pipe from his bag and placed it near the compass. Immediately, the compass needle swung wildly. It no longer pointed north. Instead, it pointed directly at the steel pipe, attracted by the metal's magnetic field. Thomas watched with wide eyes. You see? Goodeve said. This pipe weighs maybe 20 pounds. Now imagine a cargo ship weighing 10,000 tons built entirely of steel. The magnetic field it creates is enormous. Absolutely enormous, Thomas began to understand. So a U-boat could detect this field underwater? Exactly. The Germans have been using magnetic mines since the beginning of the war. We know they have the technology to detect magnetic signatures. It makes perfect sense that they would use it to hunt ships as well. Goodeve pulled out more items from his bag. He showed Thomas how different metals created different magnetic effects. Iron and steel were strongly magnetic. Aluminum and copper were not. He explained how the Earth itself was like a giant magnet, and how ships became magnetized as they traveled through the Earth's magnetic field. During construction, as workers hammer and weld the steel, the ship's hull becomes permanently magnetized, Goodeve explained. It's like rubbing a needle on a magnet to make it magnetic. The ship can't help it. It becomes a giant metal beacon announcing its presence to any U-boat with the right equipment. By early afternoon, several naval officers arrived at the laboratory. Commander Blackwell was among them, his arms crossed and his expression doubtful. With him came Captain Richard Moore, a submarine expert, and 2 technical advisors from the Admiralty. Show us this magnetic problem you claim exists, Commander Blackwell said. Goodeve repeated his demonstration with the compass and the steel pipe. The officers watched the needle swing and dance. Then he brought out his secret weapon, a sensitive magnetometer he had built himself. This device could detect even small magnetic fields. Gentlemen, please follow me outside, Goodeve said. They walked to the harbor where several naval vessels were docked. Goodeve pointed his magnetometer at a destroyer tied to the pier. The device's needle jumped dramatically. From 50 meters away, I can detect this ship's magnetic signature, Goodeve said. Now imagine a U-boat commander with similar equipment. He wouldn't need to see the ship. He wouldn't need sonar. He could simply follow the magnetic trail like a bloodhound following a scent. Captain Moore, the submarine expert, stepped forward. I've commanded submarines for 15 years. I've never heard of using magnetic detection to hunt surface ships. Have you ever wondered why U-boats seem to find convoys so easily? Goodeve asked. Even in fog, even at night, even when we maintain radio silence. They're following magnetic signatures. The officers discussed this among themselves. Commander Blackwell remained skeptical, but Captain Moore looked thoughtful. The evidence was hard to ignore. Assuming you're correct, Captain Moore said. What's your solution? We can't demagnetize a ship. Steel is steel. Goodeve smiled. We don't demagnetize it, we mask it. We create an opposite magnetic field that cancels out the ship's natural magnetism. He pulled out his notebook and showed them detailed diagrams. We wrap copper cables around the ship's hull in a specific pattern. These cables carry electrical current, which creates an electromagnetic field. By carefully calculating the strength and direction of this field, we can neutralize the ship's magnetic signature. You want to wrap our warships in copper wire? Commander Blackwell sounded incredulous. Not just warships. Every ship. Cargo vessels, tankers, troop transports, everything crossing the Atlantic. Thomas, the young assistant, had been listening quietly. Now he spoke up nervously. Dr. Goodeve, won't the electrical current be dangerous? What if a cable breaks in a storm? Sailors could be electrocuted. Good question, Goodeve said. We'll use low voltage but high amperage. The current will be strong enough to create the necessary magnetic field but not strong enough to kill someone if they touch a cable. Safety is paramount. Captain Moore examined the diagrams carefully. How much copper cable would each ship need? Approximately 3 to 5 miles of cable depending on the ship's size. 3 to 5 miles? Commander Blackwell exploded. Do you have any idea how scarce copper is during wartime? Every ounce of copper is needed for ammunition, radio equipment, and electrical systems. We can't waste miles of it on an unproven theory. It's not a waste if it saves ships, Goodeve replied quietly. Consider the math, Commander. We're losing 12 ships per week. Each ship carries supplies worth hundreds of thousands of pounds. Each ship represents dozens or hundreds of lives. If my system saves even 1 ship in 10, it pays for itself many times over. The officers fell silent. The mathematics of war were brutal but undeniable. Admiral Noble had sent a message that morning. Britain's situation was growing desperate. In the first 7 months of 1941, German U-boats had sunk over 500 Allied ships. The United States had not yet entered the war, so Britain faced the U-boat threat largely alone. Every lost ship brought the nation closer to starvation and defeat. I want to see a full-scale test, Captain Moore finally said. If you can demonstrate that this degaussing system actually works on a real ship, the Admiralty might listen. Give me 1 ship in 14 days, Goodeve said. Commander Blackwell shook his head. 2 weeks? We don't have 2 weeks. Then give me 1 week, Goodeve countered. But I need a ship, a crew, and enough copper cable to wrap around the hull. I also need a submarine to act as the hunter. We'll conduct a proper test. If my system fails, you can court-martial me for wasting resources. The officers looked at each other. It was a gamble. Resources were precious. Time was precious. But doing nothing meant watching ships sink every day. I'll recommend this to the Admiral, Captain Moore said. But understand this, Dr. Goodeve. If you fail, you'll have wasted materials, time, and manpower that Britain can't afford to lose. The blood of the next convoy will be partially on your hands. Goodeve met his gaze steadily. And if I succeed, we might finally start winning the Battle of the Atlantic. The cargo ship HMS Coastal Queen sat low in the water at a remote Scottish port called Scapa Flow. She was an old vessel, built before the war, with rust stains running down her gray hull. The Admiralty had chosen her for Dr. Goodeve's experiment, because she was not essential to any immediate operations. If the experiment failed and damaged the ship, Britain's war effort would not suffer greatly. Dr. Goodeve stood on the dock in the early morning darkness, watching his team unload massive coils of copper cable from a military truck. Thomas Wright supervised the workers, checking each coil against a detailed list. They had 6 days to complete the installation. 6 days to wrap miles of cable around a ship and prove that magnetic invisibility was possible. Careful with those, Thomas shouted as 2 workers nearly dropped a heavy coil. That cable cost more than your annual salary. The workers moved more cautiously after that. Everyone knew that copper was precious during wartime. Using so much of it on an unproven experiment made them nervous. Captain Andrew Harrison commanded the Coastal Queen. He was a practical man in his 40s who had spent 20 years at sea. When the Admiralty told him about the experiment, He thought they had gone mad. Wrapping his ship in copper wire seemed like something from a children's story, not serious naval science. "Dr. Goodeve," the captain said, approaching the scientist on the dock. "My crew thinks you're going to turn my ship into a giant electric eel. Can you explain this in a way that doesn't sound completely insane?" Goodeve smiled patiently. He had explained the concept many times already. "Captain, your ship is made of steel. Steel becomes magnetic. U-boats can detect this magnetism from underwater. We're going to create an opposite magnetic field using electrical current and copper cables. The two fields will cancel each other out. Your ship will become magnetically neutral. And you're sure this won't electrocute my men or set the ship on fire? The voltage is low. The cables are insulated. It's perfectly safe." Captain Harrison did not look convinced, but orders were orders. "Fine. My ship is yours for the next 6 days. Try not to sink her." The work began immediately. Goodeve's team had designed a specific pattern for the cables based on complex mathematical calculations. The cables needed to run horizontally around the ship's hull at precise intervals. Additional cables would run vertically from bow to stern. Every cable had to be positioned exactly right, or the magnetic fields would not cancel properly. Workers climbed onto scaffolding built around the ship. They secured the heavy cables to the hull using special brackets welded to the metal. The work was slow and dangerous. The Scottish winter was brutal. Icy winds blew constantly and rain fell nearly every day. The workers' hands became numb from the cold. Several men slipped on the wet scaffolding but managed to catch themselves before falling. Thomas Wright worked alongside the men, his engineering knowledge proving invaluable. He double-checked every measurement and connection. One mistake could ruin the entire system. By the third day, rumors began spreading through the local area. Scottish dock workers gossiped in pubs about the strange scientist wrapping a ship in copper wire. Some thought it was a new kind of armor against torpedoes. Others believed it was a secret weapon. A few whispered that the British had captured alien technology. What nobody realized was that German spies operated in Scotland. The Abwehr, Germany's military intelligence service, had agents throughout Britain gathering information about military activities. Any unusual activity attracted their attention. A man named Klaus Fischer worked at a shipyard near Scapa Flow. He appeared to be a Danish merchant who had fled the German occupation of Denmark. In reality, he was a German agent who reported to Berlin using a hidden radio transmitter. When he heard about unusual activity involving a British cargo ship and copper cable, he grew suspicious. On the fourth night, Fisher tried to get close to the Coastal Queen. He pretended to be a drunk worker stumbling near the docks. But British security had been increased around the experimental ship. 2 Royal Marines spotted him and questioned him aggressively. Fisher played his role well, acting confused and apologetic. They sent him away with a warning. He reported what he had seen to his handlers in Germany, but the information was vague. British conducting unusual experiment with copper. Cable on cargo vessel at Scapa Flow. Purpose, unknown. The German naval intelligence analysts added this to their files, but did not understand its significance. Meanwhile, Goodeve's team raced against time. By day 5, all the cables were in place. Now came the difficult part, connecting them to the ship's electrical system and calibrating the current. The Coastal Queen's engine room became a workshop. Goodeve and Thomas installed special equipment that would control the flow of electricity through the degaussing cables. The current must be steady and precisely controlled, Goodeve explained to the ship's chief engineer. Too much current will waste power and possibly damage the cables. Too little current won't create a strong enough magnetic field to cancel the ship's signature. The chief engineer, a gruff Scotsman named McTavish, examined the equipment with skepticism. "You're asking me to trust equipment I don't understand to keep my ship safe from submarines I can't see using magnetism I can't feel. Do you understand why I'm not happy about this?" "I understand completely," Goodeve said. "But I'm asking you to trust the mathematics. The calculations don't lie. On the morning of the 6th day, everything was ready. The cables wrapped around the ship like a metal cocoon. The electrical equipment hummed in the engine room. Now came the moment of truth, testing the system." Goodeve stood on the deck with his magnetometer. Captain Harrison and Thomas waited nervously beside him. The crew gathered to watch, curious and anxious. "Start the degaussing system," Goodeve called to the engine room. Below deck, Chief Engineer McTavish threw the main switch. Electricity flowed through miles of copper cable. The hum of the generators grew louder. On deck, Goodeve watched his magnetometer carefully. At first, nothing happened. The needle showed the ship's normal magnetic signature. Then slowly, the reading began to change. The magnetic field weakened more, and then incredibly it nearly disappeared. "It's working," Goodeve whispered. Then louder, "It's working!" But suddenly sparks flew from a junction box near the stern. Smoke poured out. Sailors shouted in alarm. The smell of burning insulation filled the air. "Shut it down," Captain Harrison yelled. The system went dark. The magical moment had ended in disaster. Had Goodeve's crazy idea just proven itself impossible? Smoke still drifted from the damaged junction box as Dr. Goodeve and Thomas Wright rushed to examine the problem. Captain Harrison stood nearby, his arms crossed and his face grim. The crew whispered among themselves. The experiment appeared to have failed spectacularly. "What happened?" the captain demanded. Thomas carefully opened the burnt junction box. Inside, melted wires and blackened components told the story. "Overload," he said. "We drew too much current too quickly. The connections couldn't handle it." Goodeve's shoulders sagged with disappointment. For a few brief seconds, his system had worked perfectly. The ship's magnetic signature had disappeared. But the electrical failure had ruined everything. "Can you fix it?" Captain Harrison asked. "Yes," Goodeve said, his mind already racing through solutions. "We need better insulators and stronger connection points. The theory is sound. The execution just needs refinement." They worked through the night. Thomas and the ship's electricians replaced the damaged components with heavier-duty equipment. They reinforced every connection point and added additional safety circuits. By dawn, the system was ready to test again. This time, they started slowly. Instead of activating the full system at once, they gradually increased the current. The electrical equipment hummed steadily. No sparks flew. No smoke appeared. And most importantly, Goodeve's magnetometer showed the ship's magnetic signature fading to nearly nothing. "Gentlemen," Goodeve said with a tired smile, "HMS Coastal Queen has just become magnetically invisible." News of the successful test reached the Admiralty within hours. Admiral Noble immediately ordered the final test, a real hunt by a real submarine. If a British submarine using magnetic detection equipment could not find the Coastal Queen, then German U-boats would not find her either. HMS Seahound, a modern British submarine, was assigned as the hunter. Her commander, Lieutenant Commander Peter Walsh, received unusual orders. He was to hunt the Coastal Queen using only magnetic detection equipment. No visual searching, no sonar, no radio contact, just magnetic sensors. "Find her and report her position," Walsh's orders stated. "Prove or disprove the effectiveness of the degaussing system." The test took place on a gray morning in the North Atlantic, 40 miles from the Scottish coast. The Coastal Queen steamed along a predetermined course at 8 knots. Below the surface, HMS Seahound prowled, searching with her magnetic detection gear. Lieutenant Commander Walsh studied the readings carefully. For an hour, he found nothing. His magnetic sensors showed only the normal fluctuations of the Earth's magnetic field. No large steel ship appeared on his instruments. "Are you sure we're in the right area?" Walsh asked his navigator. "Yes, sir. According to our calculations, the target ship should be within 5 miles of our current position." Walsh ordered his submarine to surface. Through the periscope, he scanned the horizon. There, clearly visible in the morning light, was the Coastal Queen steaming peacefully along. She was less than 2 miles away. "Impossible," Walsh muttered. "She's right there, and our equipment shows nothing." He sent his report immediately. Target vessel completely undetectable by magnetic sensors despite being in visual range. Degaussing system appears to be fully effective. At the Admiralty in London, this news caused an explosion of activity. Admiral Noble convened an emergency meeting with the First Sea Lord and senior commanders. If Goodeve's system truly worked, it could change everything in the Battle of the Atlantic. "Gentlemen," Admiral Noble said, "we need to equip every ship in the Atlantic convoys with degaussing systems immediately. I'm talking about hundreds of ships." The logistics were staggering. Each ship needed 3 to 5 miles of copper cable. Hundreds of ships meant thousands of miles of cable. Britain's copper supplies were already stretched thin. Copper was needed for ammunition casings, radio equipment, electrical wiring, and 100 other military applications. Commander Philip Barrett from the Ministry of Supply attended the meeting. "Admiral, we don't have enough copper. Even if we redirect every available ounce, we can only equip perhaps 50 ships per month. At that rate, it will take over a year to protect all our Atlantic convoys. Then we find more copper, Admiral Noble said firmly. Requisition civilian electrical systems if necessary. Strip copper from buildings. Import it from Canada and America. Whatever it takes. Sir, the Americans haven't entered the war yet, another officer pointed out. They're helping us, but they won't give us strategic materials for free. Then we'll pay for it. We'll trade for it. We'll beg for it if necessary. The Admiral's voice was steel. Every week we delay, we lose ships. Every lost ship brings us closer to losing this war. Meanwhile, in Germany, Admiral Karl Dönitz studied the latest U-boat reports with growing confusion. His submarine commanders were reporting strange difficulties. Ships that should have been easy targets were somehow evading detection. U-boats positioned along known convoy routes were missing targets they should have found. The British are doing something, Dönitz told his staff. Our success rate has dropped 15% in the last month. That's not random chance. German intelligence agencies investigated. They intercepted British radio messages that mentioned degaussing, but did not understand what it meant. Captured Allied sailors were questioned, but knew nothing about magnetic systems. The German agent Fischer's report about copper cable at Scapa Flow sat in a file, not connected to the larger mystery. Back in Britain, factories began working overtime to produce copper cable. Dr. WWII trained teams of engineers to install degaussing systems. They worked in shipyards across Britain: Portsmouth, Liverpool, Glasgow, Belfast. The work had to be done quickly and secretly. Captain Harrison and the crew of the Coastal Queen became instructors. They helped train other crews on how to operate and maintain the degaussing equipment. Harrison, who had initially thought the idea was insane, now became one of its strongest advocates. I've sailed the Atlantic for 20 years, he told new trainees. I've lost friends to U-boat torpedoes. If this copper wire can save even one crew from drowning in the cold Atlantic, then every hour we spend installing it is worth it. The race was on. Could Britain equip enough ships with degaussing systems before the U-boats destroyed the supply lines? Or would the German submarines strangle the island nation into surrender? In late 1941, a large convoy designated HX-156 prepared to cross the Atlantic from Halifax, Canada, to Liverpool, England. It consisted of 42 merchant ships carrying vital supplies: food, fuel, ammunition, and aircraft parts. 20 of the ships had been equipped with degaussing systems. 22 ships remained magnetically visible. The convoy would sail directly into the most dangerous waters of the Atlantic, an area submariners called the Black Pit, because it was beyond the range of air cover from either America or Britain. U-boats hunted there freely, knowing no aircraft could attack them. Admiral Dönitz had positioned 8 U-boats along the convoy's expected route. It should have been a massacre. The U-boat commanders prepared for easy hunting. What they did not know was that this convoy would test whether Dr. WWII's crazy idea could truly save lives. The invisible ships were about to face their first real battle. Convoy HX-156 steamed into the North Atlantic on a cold November morning in 1941. 42 merchant ships arranged in columns, their hulls riding low with precious cargo. Around them, 6 escort vessels prowled nervously. The destroyer HMS Wanderer led the convoy, her captain knowing that somewhere ahead, German submarines waited in ambush. Aboard the merchant ship SS Cumberland, Captain James Peters stood on the bridge and watched the gray ocean. His ship carried 5,000 tons of wheat from Canadian farms. Britain needed that wheat. People were hungry. Rationing grew stricter every month. If his ship sank, families in London and Manchester would have less bread to eat. The Cumberland was one of the 20 ships equipped with the new degaussing system. Captain Peters did not fully understand how it worked. Copper cables wrapped around his ship's hull, carrying electricity that supposedly made the ship invisible to U-boat detectors. It sounded like magic, but the Royal Navy had installed it, so he trusted it would help. 300 miles away, German U-boat U-203 cruised slowly at periscope depth. Her commander, Kapitänleutnant Rolf Mützelburg, was an experienced hunter. He had sunk 12 Allied ships in previous patrols. His crew called him the Ghost because he could find targets that other U-boat commanders missed. Mützelburg studied the intelligence reports. British convoy HX-156 would pass through his patrol area within 2 days. He had already radioed 7 other U-boats to form a wolf pack. Together, they would attack the convoy from multiple directions at night. It was a proven tactic that had destroyed countless Allied ships. "Prepare the magnetic detection equipment," Mutzelberg ordered his second officer. "We'll find them before they know we're here." German U-boats had been using magnetic anomaly detectors since 1940. The device could sense the magnetic disturbance created by large, steel ships from up to 5 kilometers away. It gave U-boats a tremendous advantage, especially at night or in poor weather when visual detection was impossible. On the second day at sea, Convoy HX-156 entered the danger zone. The escort commander ordered all ships to increase their zigzag pattern, making them harder to target. Lookouts scanned the horizon constantly. Everyone knew that U-boats were near. The question was not if they would be attacked, but when. U-203 made first contact just after sunset. Mutzelberg's magnetic detector picked up a strong signal. "Contact bearing 045 degrees, range approximately 4 kilometers, the detector operator reported. Mutzelberg smiled. The hunt had begun. He raised the periscope and scanned the darkening horizon. There, barely visible, he could see the smoke from the convoy's ships. "Excellent. Radio the other boats. Tell them we found the convoy. Prepare for night surface attack." As darkness fell, the U-boats surfaced and began their approach. On the surface, submarines were faster and harder to detect. Their low profiles blended into the black ocean. Only the white foam of their bow waves might give them away. 203 prowled closer to the convoy. Mutzelberg consulted his magnetic detector constantly. It showed multiple targets, their magnetic signatures blazing like beacons in his equipment. He counted the signals. "I count 22 ships," he told his crew. "More than enough targets for everyone, but something was wrong." Mutzelberg could see more than 22 ships through his binoculars. He counted carefully. At least 40 vessels steamed in the convoy formation. Yet his magnetic detector only showed 22 strong signals. "Check the equipment," he ordered. "Something's malfunctioning." The detector operator ran diagnostics. "All systems functioning normally, Captain. I'm only receiving 22 strong magnetic signatures." This made no sense. Mutzelberg radioed the other U-boats. "Are your magnetic detectors working properly?" The responses came back confused. U-571 reported detecting only 18 ships. U-94 counted 23. U-552 reported 20 signals. Every U-boat commander was seeing different numbers, and all of them were lower than the visual count of ships in the convoy. "What's happening?" Mutzelberg's first officer asked. "I don't know," the captain admitted, "but we can still see them. We'll attack using visual targeting." The wolf pack moved into position. 8 U-boats prepared to strike from different angles simultaneously. It was a coordinated attack that should have been devastating. U-2203 chose its first target, a large tanker on the convoy's western edge. Mutzelberg lined up his shot carefully. "Fire tube 1." The torpedo left the submarine with a hiss of compressed air. 40 seconds later, a massive explosion lit up the night. The tanker erupted in flames as thousands of gallons of fuel oil ignited. Men screamed. The ship began to sink immediately. The convoy erupted in chaos. Escort ships raced toward the attackers, their searchlights sweeping the dark water. Radio operators called for help. Merchant ships scattered, trying to avoid the next torpedo. U-94 fired at another target. Another explosion. Another ship hit. The battle raged for 2 hours as U-boats darted in and out, firing torpedoes and then diving to escape the escort ship's depth charges. But something strange was happening. The U-boat commanders were having difficulty finding targets. Ships that should have been easy to detect simply disappeared from their magnetic sensors. Mutzelberg would acquire a target, line up for a shot, lose the magnetic signal, and suddenly be unable to relocate the ship in the darkness. Where did it go? He shouted in frustration as another target vanished from his detector. He could have sworn a large cargo ship was directly ahead, but his magnetic equipment showed nothing. By midnight, the battle ended. The U-boats had exhausted their torpedoes and withdrew. Mutzelberg radioed his report to Admiral Donitz. Attacked convoy HX-156, sank 6 ships. Many targets detected visually but not magnetically. Request explanation. Our detection equipment appears to be malfunctioning. Similar reports came from the other U-boat commanders. They had all experienced the same problem. Ships that should have been easily detectable had somehow disappeared from their magnetic sensors. Convoy HX-156 continued toward Britain. 6 ships had been lost, including the tanker, and 5 cargo vessels without degaussing systems. But 20 ships equipped with degaussing had survived undetected. The magnetic invisibility had worked. When the convoy reached Liverpool, British naval intelligence officers interviewed all the captains. Captain Peters of the Cumberland described the battle from his perspective. "We were in the middle of the convoy," he said. "I saw the tanker explode. I saw other ships hit by torpedoes. But no submarine seemed to target us. It was as if they couldn't see us, even though we were right there." The statistics were clear. Of the 6 ships sunk, all 6 had been vessels without degaussing systems. Not a single ship with magnetic invisibility had been hit. The difference was dramatic and undeniable. Dr. Goodeve received the news in his laboratory. He sat down heavily in his chair, overwhelmed with emotion. His crazy idea had worked. His system had saved lives. 20 crews had come home to their families because of copper wire and mathematics. Admiral Noble immediately ordered the degaussing program expanded. Every available resource was diverted to installing the systems on more ships. Factories worked around the clock. Engineers trained day and night. By early 1942, over 300 ships had been equipped with degaussing systems. The German Navy struggled to understand what had happened. Their magnetic detection equipment, once so reliable, now gave inconsistent results. Some ships could be detected, others could not. Admiral Dönitz ordered investigations, but German intelligence could not discover the British secret. A captured British sailor was questioned in early 1942. Under interrogation, he mentioned something about degaussing coils but did not understand what they were. The German interrogators filed the report but did not connect it to the magnetic detection problems their U-boats experienced. By mid-1942, the effectiveness of German U-boats had dropped significantly. They still sank ships, but at a much lower rate. The happy time was over. American entry into the war in December 1941 brought more resources and more convoy escorts, improved radar, better tactics, and increased air cover all contributed to the Allied victory in the Atlantic. But one of the most important factors, though least known, was the work of a quiet scientist who wrapped ships in copper wire. Dr. Charles Goodeve's degaussing system remained classified until long after the war ended. He never sought fame or recognition. He simply continued working on new scientific problems that might help Britain survive. In total, historians estimate that degaussing systems saved hundreds of ships and thousands of lives during World War II. The exact number will never be known because the success of the system was measured in ships that were never attacked, sailors who never drowned, and supplies that reached Britain safely. Captain Mutzelberg of U-203 survived until 1942, when his submarine was sunk by a British destroyer. He never learned why his magnetic detectors had failed that night in November 1941. The secret remained hidden. The Battle of the Atlantic raged until May 1945, when Germany surrendered. Over 72,000 Allied sailors and merchant seamen died in that long struggle. But the casualties would have been far worse without the invisible shield that one scientist's crazy idea had created. After the war, Dr. Charles Goodeve received a knighthood for his contributions to victory. When reporters asked him about degaussing, he smiled modestly and said, "I just did the mathematics." The real heroes were the sailors who trusted the science and sailed into danger. The copper cables that once wrapped convoy ships have long since been removed and recycled. But the principle of degaussing is still used today by modern navies to make their warships less detectable. The invisible shield that helped win World War II continues to protect sailors in the 21st century, a lasting legacy of one man's determination to turn a crazy idea into reality.